Oh, 7. Okay, there we go. I just gotta.
Oh, you got 11. There we go.
Yep. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We're we'll get started in just a minute here. Thank you. All right. So why don't we go ahead and start? We have like 22 people on. So my apologies for the delay. Welcome to the Maine chapter AMC's Wednesday webinar series. Tonight we have, again, Carey Kish. We'll talk about his, was it 2016, 17?
17.
2017 Florida Trail hike. Um, most of you probably know Carey, but he's an outdoor author, long distance hiker, and all around great guy. So without any further ado, Carey, I'll let you take it over.
I'll get the check out to you, Bill. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks, Bill, and thanks AMC for putting this on. Let me get this program up and going. I probably need to share a screen first, don't we? There we go. There we go. All right. How's that look, Bill?
You get your screen up.
Okay, perfect. Yep. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks again for sticking with us. These Zoom things are, well, they're new to everybody. So thanks again. The Florida Trail, one of the most unheralded of the long trails in the country. 2-3 winters ago, from January to March, I hiked from the southern part of the state at the Everglades, at the edge of the Everglades, to Pensacola Bay, a distance of well over 1,000 miles. The Florida Trail, if you haven't heard of it, it's been around for 50-something years. It is one of our 11 national scenic trails. It is right down here. It's one of only 2 that runs the length of a state and no others, so it's all contained in Florida. Kind of like the Arizona Trail in Arizona. Of course, you have the PCT, the CDT, Appalachian Trail. So it's one of the big boys, but it hasn't really gotten a lot of play over the years. 3 years ago, it was time to give it a good look-see, and so I did. So the Florida Trail, in the whole Florida Trail system, about 1,450 miles. Let me just set a timer here for me. There we go. The Florida Trail, if you're going to through hike it, it's about 1,100 miles from Big Cypress National Preserve, right at the edge of the Everglades in the southern part of the state, up around Lake Okeechobee. There are 2 ways to get around the metro Orlando area, and around the Big Bend, along the north of the Gulf of Mexico, through the Panhandle, out to Gulf Islands National Seashore. And if you think Florida's flat, well, it kind of mostly is, but there is 22,000 feet, I think, of elevation gain. Lots of campsite shelters. Pretty much most of it's managed by the Forest Service. There's wildlife management areas, that kind of thing. And the Florida Trail Association are the folks that kind of keep it together and manage the whole thing. Any long distance trip like the AT, the PCT, whatever, the Florida Trail is the same. Takes a lot of planning if you're going to be gone for, as I was, 72 days, 2.5 months. There's maps, there's guidebooks, and as is my usual, I put together a big spreadsheet of, I winnow all the information down and put together a spreadsheet so that I kind of have a plan in mind. And I found on the AT, the Florida Trail, the PCT, that I've kind of stuck with the plan for the most part. And that's great. Of course, it is just a plan, but it's really nice to have something to follow so that you're not out there going, well, what's next? I don't know. You can't really approach a long trail hike like that. The other cool thing that I used for the first time on the Florida Trail was the Guthook app for navigation. It had been available during my 2015 AT through hike, but I didn't need it, didn't use it. On the Florida Trail, I'm really glad I had it because there were a lot of places where I would have gotten supremely lost or misdirected, if you will. And I know that on a PCT this past year, it was a lifesaver. So January 6th, the winter time is the time to hike the Florida Trail. You just wouldn't want to do it any other time. October to March, April is the best time for hiking in Florida, and for through hiking, December, January through March or April, because of it's the dry season, if you will, even though it does rain. The real draw about the Florida Trail for through hikers is it's the only trail you can hike in the wintertime, long trail hike you can take in the wintertime, where you don't really need big layers of warm clothing. And that has drawn a lot of hikers. There were 20 hikers out there perhaps in 2017. I think this past year there were probably over 100. So it's really getting up there in notoriety. So to give you some orientation, the Florida Keys down here, this is the southern tip of Florida, the Everglades National Park, and Big Cypress National Preserve, which was created, I think, back in the 70s, right about halfway between Naples and Miami. 750,000 acres, and it was the country's first national preserve, and it is a true wildland. Now, the Florida Trail, Florida in general, never really appealed to me most of my life. I did the Disney thing once, and I went to Key West and drank a lot of beer. But Florida was mostly too flat, too hot, too humid, too many people. And then right before I hiked the AT in 2015, we overshot Georgia. Oh, we overshot Georgia, and we overshot Georgia and ended up in Florida and camped right next to the Florida Trail, and I got to check it out a little bit, and I thought, well, maybe I'll do that one day. But it's got everything that you know, it's got a lot of my phobias. It's got a lot of dark water, snakes, lots of bugs, and alligators. And every inland waterway in Florida is, you have to consider that there are alligators in it. So swimming was pretty much off limits, except in the springs up in Ocala. So you start out at the Oasis Visitor Center there in Big Cypress, right on Highway 41. And there are canals along all the roads, pretty much everywhere in South Florida. And as you walk into the visitor center to sign in and all that, and at the start of the trail is right nearby, and you have to look down into the canals and see these monstrous alligators, and you're going, oh my God, whatever have I gotten myself into? So they're part of the hike. In the end, it wasn't a huge deal, but you know, from a guy coming from New England, you're thinking, I just don't know about this. This is crazy stuff. So you're thinking, well, how's this going to go? And one way is, well, you know, I'll take care of it. Alligators, no big deal. And then the other part of me says, oh my God, I'm a dead man. So, you know, and it was kind of somewhere in between. Now, the Florida Trail Association, I don't know if they still do this, but they were doing it for a lot of years. They do a kickoff weekend, the first weekend in January, and they hosted all the hikers at a campground in Ochapi, and put on some barbecues and kind of got people oriented, and then gave us rides to the trail if we needed it. Fran was down there with the camper, so I was all set. But it was really nice and a comfortable way to kind of get started. And a bunch of us started off on January 6th. The fellow on the far left, I'd hiked part of the Appalachian Trail with in 2015. He was out for 4 days just for some fun and to hang out with me. The guy on his right, Billy Boxcar, former hobo man. We hiked 700 miles together. Eagle Eye, you're right in the middle. I know you're online listening. Pirate, and then there's me and Melanie, who on the far right, who's hiked the Ice Age Trail and a few others. So Big Cypress is a swamp, and it was a dry winter, January 2017. So it could have been water all the way, but it wasn't. But you knew the water was out there. So off this whole cadre of people went into the slash pines and the sawgrass and the palmetto. And this is all new terrain to me. I had no idea what to expect, and rightly so. Now, Florida is underlain by limestone bedrock. It's very porous, and limestone tends to dissolve over time, and there's all these solution holes. Now, these are a hazard when they're underwater, and even when there's no water on top of them, because you're hiking along and you can catch your foot in it and take a good dive, maybe break an ankle, break a leg. You never know. And then there's also other hazards that are put there by funny folks who think it's cool to put a cast of an alligator right next to the trail in the bushes so you don't see it, and you jump and get the whatever scared right out of you, like I did. So this is very typical of the trail before we get into the water. Bald cypress, of course, is a deciduous conifer. The trail's marked by orange blazes, and there's all these cool air plants, which are an epiphyte, which hang on the cypress trees. And about 10 miles was all we could manage that first day, 10-mile camp. And we set up in the grass, amidst the palmettos. And this is about as many people as I was going to see that year on the trail. Beyond Big Cypress, Billy Swamp Safari, what thru hikers were out there, either were doing 30, 40 miles a day, or were like me doing 15 or 20, and there weren't very many of us, so we kind of spread out, and that was that. Now you're in the middle of this swamp, and it happens to look pretty dry. Where are you going to get water? Well, that first night, we had to trundle over the sawgrass over to a cypress dome, in the middle of which you will usually find water. And where there is water, we know that there are also likely to be alligators. And you can see why it's called a cypress dome, because of the dome shape of the trees. And in the middle of that cypress dome is a solution hole, otherwise known as a gator hole. And this is where you get your water. Now, I'd worried about this. It says it right in the guidebook. You don't want to bend down at dusk or dawn next to a water source to collect your water, because an alligator may very well take you as you may look like a deer or something, and they may grab you and pull you in, and that's pretty much all she wrote. For as long as I hiked with Boxcar Billy, we never got over it. Somebody looked over the other's shoulder as one gathered the water, and then we would switch places. Just alligators are on your mind, even though they're really not that big a threat, but you never know when that's going to happen. The following morning, we had a great group of folks that night. Everybody kind of went their own way. We had some people come in from the north, a bunch of us headed north. And again, this was the big group, and that was it for the rest of the 2.5-month hike for the most part. Now, like I said, Big Cypress, there was a swamp out there, but it was still dry. And you're thinking about it, and you kind of think, what does a swamp look like? And what's 3 days of hiking through a swamp going to be like? Well, here it is. Suddenly there's water, and there's mud, and then there's more water. And more water. And you hike through this. This is a long, tough day. You hike through the water. It could be anywhere from ankle deep to knee deep to thigh deep. And of course, there's nowhere during the day. You're doing, I think we did 13 miles. Nowhere to really stop, take your pack off, have a bite to eat. You just kind of had to keep moving and eat whatever was in your pockets. And eventually, we reached this little dry piece of land called a hammock. It was just inches above the surrounding swamp, which is surrounded by water. And this damp little spot is where we camped the second night. And to get water, the second night was much different than the first. You stepped down off of the little island and out into the water, and we all fanned out very carefully and in our own directions with our water bags and our cups, and collected our water, because this water, it's a sheet flow that flows from the north across the land, and it's crystal clear, beautiful water, and it's perfect for drinking. Now, when you're walking through it, it's crystal clear. If you're the first person through, if you're the second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, then it's just a mucky mess. The following morning at 7 a.m., we set out again, and we reached the Black Lagoon, which was up to waist deep. And thank goodness it didn't get any higher. But that was pretty interesting. And there were water moccasins. Never saw any alligators or any signs, but if they were out there, they might have been. I never saw the water moccasins. I was always the kind that would have to have them pointed out to me. Hey, beer man, did you see that water moccasin you just stepped over? Well, of course not. No, I didn't. That was the way for the whole trip for me. I just never saw them, except for one time. Now, this swamp walking, I paid a lot of attention to the Florida Trail Facebook pages, the hiking groups, and I kept these notes on my phone. And this is pretty interesting about what somebody had written about hiking through Big Cypress. It's a fast walk from 10-mile camp to 13-mile camp, which I just showed you. We made it in 3 hours, and it took 5 more hours to get to Oak Hill. And that's just the start of the slog. Oak Hill Camp is a heel-slurping, soul-sucking trek that will make you question your very existence. If you understand this coming in, maybe you won't slit your wrists for being such a moron to want to hike in a swamp. Honestly, 3 inches of mud and 3 inches of water for 5 miles sounds doable on paper, but trust me, you'll be bitching out loud. And it's a slog. It is a slog. And you can see more of the air plants hanging off of the cypress trees. But I got to tell you, as you move out there, besides the people just slurping through the water, it's big, open, empty country. And that's why it's wilderness. There's a lot out there, but you know what I mean when I say there's nothing out there. The silence out there reminded me a lot of being in the Grand Canyon, because it was just big, open, empty country, and it was really captivating, despite the interesting trail that you're following through this watery terrain. Now, my friend Eagle Eye, God love her. Eagle Eye had a few problems, fell over a few times. You can see by the back of her that she spent some time. And you didn't want to fall in those solution holes because you just didn't want to go over on your back, get all your gear wet. Eagle Eye did that a few times, but she was a trooper. And eventually you must come out of the swamp. And you do. After 4 days, 3-4 days, you hit Interstate 75, Alligator Alley, where there's a rest area along the interstate. And for the first time in my life, I found these machines. They took credit cards because we weren't carrying any change. And the whole group of us pretty much cleaned out the vending machines, as through hikers will often do. And the other thing is we were able to use the bathrooms to wash the gunk, the muck, the mud out of our shoes and our clothes. And I think we did make quite a mess of the place. After resting up at the rest area, we headed north on what's called the Nobles Road. This is what the trail was like for the next, week or so along these old roads through this jungle-like growth. And up ahead, I saw Boxcar and Parks on the left there. Parks, all of a sudden, just, I was lagging behind, getting tired. I saw him jump and rather nonchalantly just kind of look over to the side and then just continue walking. And I had no idea what he had done. And then when I got to the very same spot, I jumped 4 feet in the air, I swear to God, And to my right, because I almost stepped right on this fella who was right next to me on the trail and scared the living daylights out of me. And of course I yelled up at Parks. I said, "You could have said something." He said, "Oh, I figured you'd see it." Well, not the case. So of course, I never want to tell my wife this, but I did have to walk back over and make sure I got a few good pictures. She thinks I'm an idiot. I may well be. You are. But there's lots of these big bad fellows. They may be gals too. I don't know. Can't tell the difference along the canals there. And we saw plenty of them that evening. The first resupply was at Billy's Swamp Safari. Great little restaurant. I was able to pick up my first mail drop. I had bought a cheap pair of Walmart knockoff sneakers to wear through the swamp so that I could ruin them, and I knew I would, and then just throw them out. So I got my new shoes there and stayed in a Chickie, saw my first Florida airboat, and God, are they noisy, and then moved on. Now, the next part of the Florida Trail route goes through the canals of South Florida, south of Lake Okeechobee, which is the state's largest body of water. And a lot of the walking, it's through big, wide open country, but a lot of the walking is on these old limestone roads, and there are canals, always canals, one side, the other side, both sides. And the further along you went, you got into this wider country. Now, I had been under the impression that this is where I would see citrus, oranges, grapefruits, lemons, whatever, because, you know, it's Florida. But instead, it was cattle country and sugarcane, and not a lot else. This is an image of one of the camps along the limestone roads and the canals. On the first night out into the canals, which is what I call that section of trail, these beautiful grassy spots next to the levees, we thought, this is great. We'll just lay out our sleeping bags, you know, enjoy the sunset, go to bed, sleep under the stars, cowboy style, all good. Well, we learned a maxim about hiking in Florida. I honestly, God, didn't know that there were mosquitoes in the wintertime, but alas, there are. And at exactly 10 minutes after sunset, this night and every night, wherever you were near water, this is what you got. And this, of course, is not my picture. But all of a sudden, 10 million freaking mosquitoes everywhere. And there's two guys, me and Boxcar, trying to get our tents out of the pack, get the tents set up, kill the 300,000 mosquitoes that are in the tent on you, and then get some rest. And that's it. We only had to make that mistake once. The smoke in the background here is what you can see. They're burning the sugarcane fields so they can plant again. And I do remember this stretch because this is the one time in my life where on this particular day, after 3 miles of making a few turns, the rest of the day, 13 miles, was in a straight line. The trail never deviated, and that was fairly monotonous. But it was either on these roads, the gravel roads, the limestone roads, or on the levees themselves, like you see here. We camped at a roadside rest area that evening with alligator water right there behind us. And the following few days were much the same. Big, wide open, quiet, empty country. Even though it had all the prints of humankind all around, it was pretty wild to be out there. And it was hot, 102 degrees. I had temperature swings from about, I think this is about the warmest it got, down to about 22. So it did get cold, colder than I thought it would. And I had a good sleeping bag, but not a lot of layers. But you knew as soon as the sun came up and you got moving, it wasn't like being in the Sierras or anything. It was going to get warm that day. We had the good fortune to meet up with a guy from the South Florida Water Management District who gave us a few gallons of cold, fresh water, and also explained how the long, sordid history of how mankind has completely screwed up the water regime in the Everglades and the Kissimmee River and all of that, which we are slowly trying to put back together if we can ever do it. Now, there's two ways to go around Lake Okeechobee. You can go around the east side or the west side. I chose to go around the west side. Either side was going to be under construction. The dike that holds the water into Lake Okeechobee was all under construction for the most part. I chose to go west. Unfortunately, west just meant a little more road walking, and you get further away from the lake, so you really can't see it all that well. But nonetheless, that was how I chose to go, and it was a pretty pleasant route. This is the Herbert Hoover Dike, built by the Army Corps, and you can see that it is indeed. Normally, you can walk right on top of the dike, and there's a 100-mile route, I believe, right around the lake if you stay on the dike. But we had to do some alternate routes. And this is about the biggest view I got of the lake, because most of the time I was pretty far away from it. Did get to hike some parts of the dike on the northern fringes of Lake Okeechobee. This is quite typical. Some of the paths was paved, some was just grass. And again, you're you're kind of looking like you're in civilized terrain, but yet you're pretty well out there. And I did love the quiet and the big open skies of Florida. It really took to it. Along Lake Okeechobee, you have to cross these locks, and there's a bunch of them. I didn't know the first couple, and the lock tenders didn't say anything, but this fine fellow in the orange shirt said, "Hey, hikers, all hikers were authorized to give 2 bottles of ice cold drinking water." And we took advantage of that each and every time, I'm telling you, because there's nothing like good, clean, cold, fresh water when you're hiking through the hot sun of Florida. And I'd never camped under palm trees anywhere ever in my life, and that was pretty neat. It had some nice campsites like this one here. Some had shelters, some didn't. This is another neat one here on the canal. And a fine evening with a rainbow after a shower. North of the lake, you get into the Kissimmee River Valley. Years ago, the Army Corps had taken the Kissimmee River, which was once a beautiful, long, winding river, and dammed it up and canaled it up into a straight line for I don't know how many miles. And that's part of what they're trying to undo now. That was a complete disaster ecologically. But that was great, interesting terrain, just like hiking through a jungle of palmettos and pines. And the water, how you got your water was a little different through this stretch. There were well pumps at some of the campsites, which was pretty neat. And where there wasn't, trail angels, just like on the AT and the PCT, trail angels would put out gallons of fresh water for you. And you just, you're on a long hike, you can't do without trail angels. They are as good as gold. Borrowing a well or water from trail angels, you had to resort to the stooping down with the alligators, or so you hoped against. But there was plenty of water. Now to get around to Orlando has grown right out of its sneaker. It's grown almost from coast to coast. I don't know how many millions of people there are, but there's no easy way around it. But yet the route around Orlando, it takes 3 or 4 days to get around it. It's pretty wild until you get right into the edge of the urban core there. And even at that, it wasn't too bad. This is crossing Interstate 4 in the heart of the urban Orlando there. Fran was there with the camper set up at a state park. So my friend Boxcar and I were able to slack pack with day packs for a couple, 3 days through the streets of Orlando. And this is the official Florida Trail through that area. It was sidewalks and city streets and bike paths, pedestrian paths. And we certainly did pass our share of gated communities in some areas. And each evening, Fran would scoop us up, bring us back to, I can't remember, Waukeeta Springs State Park, I think it was. And we'd do steaks and burgers and cold beer, get a shower, and all was well with the world. Now, the Florida Trail has been around since 1966. The through hiking route of 1,100 miles is there's about 800 miles of that, a little more, I think, today that's been completed. The rest of the time, you must walk on roads. Florida is densely populated, and along the coast anyway, in some parts of the interior. And just the way things are, the history down there with land use and who owns the land. There's plenty of public land, but there are gaps, and these are the gaps that have persisted almost pretty much since the trail was created in 1966. So there's about 300 miles of gaps. Now, I think about 250 now. I think they've, Florida Trail people have been really doing a great job of sewing together more trail off into the woods, but you still got to walk some roads. And you know what? That's a pain. And here's you can see the 300 miles of gaps. That's what any through hiker has to deal with. But the cool thing about it is some of the roads are lightly traveled. Some are really lightly traveled, and you get to see the farms, the orchards, the ranches, and you get to meet the locals who will very often stop and talk to you. So you get to see a little bit of Florida and the rural life of interior Florida in a way that you wouldn't otherwise. So the walking the roads to connect the dots on the Florida Trail just became what you did. And you got resigned to it, and you just did it. And it became part of what you did. And some of it was dirt, as you can see here. And then some of it was along the coast, through sand dunes. Sometimes it would rain like hell out there, and it would be just downright miserable for miles and miles and miles. Other days it would be sunny and bright and beautiful, and walking along the roads didn't seem like much of a deal. Now, my buddy Boxcar had an MP3 player, which I did not. So he could tune out. He would tune in and then tune out and just chug out the miles. And I didn't have anything like that at the time. And I did buy one of those for the PCT. So I had to really kind of turn my brain off to chug out 15 miles on a road walk. And I got pretty well used to just pretty much thinking about nothing. There were citrus trucks and fruit trucks. Every now and again, an orange would come flying off the citrus truck, and we got pelted by a few of those. The pulp trucks, I got hit by a flying piece of bark, caught me in the shoulder, and just twisted me right around pretty good. And of course, you had to deal with, not in these stretches right here, but you had to deal with a lot of the roadside trash where people jettisoned from their vehicles. And I have notes of just about everything I saw, from hammers and nails to credit cards and phones and Hardee's trash and Bud Light cans and everything in between. I could write a book about just what I saw along the roadsides, and dead animals, of course. So here's another one of the notes I kept about road walking. And I do remember the stretch along Route 60 between River Ranch and the Three Lakes Wildlife Management Area. It was the most miserable and dangerous walk I had ever taken. These are not my words. It is heavily used by large, fast-moving trucks. Both road shoulders slope deeply, I remember that, and are filled with tall grasses and weeds that are filled with trash and decomposing animal carcasses from roadkills. There are two bridges with tight shoulders that force hikers right along next to the fast-moving vehicles. I had one person shout at me as they drove by at 60 miles an hour, and on and on. And fortunately, most of the road walks are not like that. But there were a few. Route 60 was 5 miles I would never want to do again. Another one was on Route 100, pictured here. Normally, the trail goes across the New River about a mile into your left on a railroad trestle, but that was in disrepair, and the planks had been removed, so you were forced out onto this busy highway, which doesn't look very busy right here. But all you had was this narrow little stretch to walk along between the guardrail and the white line, and about 200 yards. And the truck traffic, everything was going right at next to your right elbow. And so what we did to get across was, and the Billy's taken off right now, to run with a loaded backpack. He would run as fast as he could, and then I would run as fast as I could behind him. And then when traffic would come, we would jump up on the guardrail. When the big trucks would come, we would jump up onto the concrete barrier. And then when everything would pass by, we would get out and do it again. So it took us 3 or 4 iterations of that to get to the other side. That's probably another stretch I don't want to do again. But as I told you, going along the roads, through the little towns, through the villages, through the rural areas, you meet all kinds of cool people. And that always, besides the beauty, the natural beauty of any hike, that is always what I enjoy most. And these two guys, to be honest, their name is escaping me at the moment, but they ran a food pantry at a little church, and they came out and they were just fabulous. And they went back in and they said, "You guys must be hungry." It's like, "Oh, are you kidding me? We're thru hikers." And they brought us out a dozen cream filled chocolate cupcakes and a half gallon of chocolate milk. And we just sat there, and you can see my buddy Boxcar is, he's as happy as a pig and you know what, and so am I. But that's just all part of the Florida road walking experience. You also get to meet law enforcement. This is a conservation officer right here. You get to meet a lot of the people who are managing the land, which is pretty neat. So again, you would wish the trail would be off in the woods into the swamp somewhere, but if it can't be, then you make it enjoyable, and it is enjoyable. And the people always make it that way. Another bonus about walking along the roads was every now and again you'd come to a convenience store or some store of some kind. And as a thru hiker who likes to eat, every thru hiker likes to eat and eat a lot. It was always cool to dive in and get some snacks, even if you weren't even hungry. You just did. And there were plenty of these. Well, not plenty, but enough to really keep you happy. Cold beer, fries, coleslaw, and a burger. Nothing like it. Nothing like it. And again, meeting some of the local trail angels who would pull over and stop and ask, "How you doing? What can I do for you? Do you need anything? You need a ride? Can I send a message to somebody up ahead?" And that, folks, is true love, real beauty. And every trail is like that. If you're open to that kind of kindness. Walking along the roads too in Florida, also, you pass a lot of cool signs, and I just got such a kick out of some of these, like this one. Floridians, as a general rule, especially in the rural areas, and it's common in most rural areas in the States, people like their private land, their private property. Trespassers will be shot. Survivors will be shot again. And then my favorite, prayer is the best way to meet the Lord. Trespassing is faster. And then in Palatka at Sonny's Barbecue, which we did not patronize that day. We went to the Golden Corral instead, but you could get a pork three-way for $12.99. I did not opt for that. I don't even want to know what that was all about. There was the long-suffering road. Yes, that's how most of the road walks were in one way or another. They were tough on your feet. Not much of it was easy street, whether you're in the woods or not. Along one of the stretches in a rural part of the Panhandle was even a Pepsi machine, which was plugged in and did take coins and credit cards, and there was a long extension cord out to it. It did work. And of course, any good thru hiker worth their salt never does pass up a good porta potty. And you even can see sometimes on trails like the Florida Trail, you can find aliens along the way. The very last 2 miles of the Florida Trail, after 2.5 months, the last bit of road walking, I was going along this paved stretch of road. I just signed into Gulf Islands National Seashore, and a vehicle drove right up and pretty much touched my left elbow, and I was PO'd. I'd had just about enough. It was hot and sweaty, and brushed my left elbow almost, more or less, and I turned, and I don't know what I was going to say. I was kind of upset, and I look, and there I see the Shaw's Hiker Hostel sign on the side of the truck, and there's Poet from the Hiker Hostel in Monson, Maine, who was down in Florida with his family on vacation, had been following me on Facebook, wanted to stop by and say hi. And so Poet and Hippie Chick and their kids were having a good time. That was really, really cool. Poet went on to hike the Florida Trail, I think the following week. Perhaps the best stretch of the entire Florida Trail was Ocala National Forest. This is the original part of the Florida Trail. The first 22, 24 miles of the trail were blazed here in 1966 with those classic orange blazes. And that stretch of trail is still there, still the same. This is just, I think there's about 70 miles of trail through the Ocala. Big wilderness areas, beautiful longleaf pine, slash pine, sand pines, sand hills, springs. Jim Kern, businessman from Florida, he gets the credit for founding the trail back in '66. And he told me in an interview for a story I was doing a month or so ago that in 10 years, he and the Florida Trail Association, which he founded as well, they were able to cobble together those 800 miles of trail, more or less, in 10 years. So it's quite an undertaking. And Florida, had no really long distance hiking of any kind until Jim and the Florida Trail people got together and made it happen, which is really, really cool. And the diversity, as you can already tell, the diversity of ecosystems in Florida, which is its real draw, from the piney forest to the swamps, to the sawgrass prairies, to the beaches, the lakes, the prairies, the wetlands, all of it makes Florida so ecologically diverse. It's mind-boggling. And so there's more than meets the eye than flat, hot, humid Florida. And it's really worth your while. So the Ocala, like I said, beautiful walking through the pines, just lovely. Had a good stretch of weather, which always helps. And the blue water warm springs were just fantastic. This is Alexander Springs, and I hit every one of them. These are the only times I ever went swimming. There are no alligators in the springs. These things are 70, 72 degrees year round, and they're just fabulous. So wonderful. This is a little bit different. This is Juniper Springs, which is walled in, and that was fabulous too. Look at that beautiful blue-green water. I went into every one of these I could find because it was cool and there were no alligators. There were lakes, shallow lakes, wetland prairies, Farrell's Prairie here, I believe this is, just beautiful. And the sand pines, the largest area of sand pines, largest concentration of sand pines anywhere in the world in the Ocala. And some really cool campsites. This is my old tent that I had on the AT, used it again on the Florida Trail. Camping in the pine duff, big, empty, quiet spaces, great sleeping, fantastic. You can see off in the distance here, this is in the middle of the Ocala. You got some gray smoke out back. There is a Navy bombing range on the west side of the Ocala. And I think they're A-10s, I'm not sure, would fly over, strafing the treetops and then drop their bombs. And it was a little disconcerting to hear the whistling of the bombs and then the pop and the explosion. You kind of thought you were going to get hit, but you weren't. But, so, the Florida Trail, it's got a little bit of everything, even bombing ranges. Like I said earlier, the wilderness areas in the Ocala were fantastic. This is the Juniper Prairie. This Boxcar and I are still hiking together. This was a great spot for camping. Before the sandhill cranes migrated north, there were plenty of them around. I never got some good pictures, except this is about the best pictures I got of these things. These guys would squawk and make some kind of noise all the time, and they were just fabulously beautiful. And like I said, a lovely, lovely spot on the edge of Juniper Prairie here. And again, this is Florida, folks. This is the interior, the wild heart of Florida. Big, big, big sky country, and quiet and beautiful. Near the north end of Ocala was probably the coolest wayside on the entire Florida Trail, the 88 store. And we were just going to stop in there for a few hours, get a bite to eat, maybe get a cold beer, and move on. Well, I think beer was $1.50. They had sandwiches in the freezer, and you could order takeout pizza from the store down the road. Barbecue, gas oil, ATM, laundromat, hot showers. We took advantage of pretty much everything, and set up camp out back. They let you camp for free. They had the laundromat right there next door, and we whiled away a pretty good day right there, ordering out for pizza. I think we did it twice while we were there, drinking some cold beer, and had a fine evening with some really, really friendly folks in Florida's interior. It was a great time. Well north of the Ocala, in an area called the Big Bend, is the Suwannee River of Stephen Foster's song fame. You may remember Old Folks at Home, I think is the song. Way down upon the Suwannee River, far, far away. I won't do that anymore to you. But that's Stephen Foster. Everybody knows that song. And there is a Stephen Foster State Park in White Springs, which is just fabulous. Lots of history there. This is old Florida. And for 62 miles, the Florida Trail follows more or less the coffee-colored waters of the Suwannee River and provides just some beautiful walking, great little beaches. Of course, I wasn't going in the water because there were, yes, alligators, right? But there were some great campsites, great walking, beautiful, beautiful country. And I really enjoyed the stretches. Wild and lots of wildlife. Like I said, the Suwannee is considered a blackwater river because of the decaying vegetation, which colors the water. And you can see this little sign over here on the right. Well, that's alligators, no swimming. Yep, no worries there. But I must say, one of the nights I camped along the Suwannee, you got access down to the river through these little cuts very often. And one night I'm taking my cup down there to kind of rinse it out, and I've got my spoon and my pot, and I'm just kind of sloshing it around, and all of a sudden, and my sponge goes flying into the river. I go to reach for the sponge, I drop my cup goes in the river, and then my spoon goes down between my legs, and pretty much I'm trying to get all of this gear that I need. I can't afford to lose any of it. Next thing you know, I'm in the river, I'm up to my knees and up to my waist trying to get all this stuff, and I'm going, frig, alligators, man, alligators. So I got everything and got out, no alligators. Yes, the Suwannee, lovely. Big boating on the Suwannee, lots of canoers and kayakers when it was the weekend. And one thing I want you to notice is you look across the far shore, the leaves are coming out. Yes, this is February, but the leaves are coming out, and springtime is, oh no, what did I do? Let me get back there. I clicked out, sorry. There we go. Yes, it's getting to be spring, and with the spring came these incredible patches of white lilies, and it was just wonderful. And how this added to the walk was just fantastic. Days and days and days of white lilies, which was pretty cool. About 700 miles in, my friend Boxcar and I, he got that name because he was a hobo who rode the rails for a lot of years, and ended up writing a book about it. One of the coolest guys I'll ever want to know. We walked out to, if it wasn't for him, I would have hiked alone most of the time. And we just had a great time. We laughed, we had a great sense of humor, and made fun of everything, irreverent, and just had a good time. And one day we walked out to a road, intent on meeting one of the trail angels to get a ride into town. And Billy gets a call from home, and it's a family emergency, and he's got to go. And that's the end of that. And he hitched one way towards the bus station, and I walked ahead, and I was on my own for the next 3.5 weeks and the last 400 miles. I miss you, boy. Miss your brother. You're a good guy. All right. A few of the final big areas that I walked through in the Panhandle. St. Mark's was fantastic. I love the, as you walk into St. Mark's National Wildlife Area, the quote by Edward Abbey, "May your trails be crooked, winding, lonesome, dangerous, and leading to the most amazing view." Abbey always got it right. But the palms, the cabbage palms, these cathedrals of palms that I walked to were just fantastic. And it was just breathtaking to walk through just like we would walk through our pine forests here in Maine, or a stand of mature spruce. These palms were incredible. Really enjoyed that. Then it was out into the salt marshes, the open salt marsh country. The Gulf of Mexico is not too far away, but you're far enough away and low enough down that you don't get to see it. And this was great walking as well along the levees. Beautiful open country. Lots of wildlife like herons here, pictured here, white-tailed deer, hawks, and stacked up like cordwood pretty much everywhere along those mud flats were alligators. They were everywhere. Not too close though, not too close. Didn't have to walk over any, didn't get scared by any. We got to see a lot, more than I needed to see. And then there was this guy. I don't know how old this one is, how big it is, only half out of the water. I don't want to know. And I would not want my leg in that set of jaws. That is a big alligator. On the other end of St. Mark's, you come to the St. Mark's River, the namesake of the wildlife area. And as you can see, there is no bridge across the St. Mark's River. It's up to you to find a way across. And most hikers, the few that come through, they hail a passing boat, and that's the way to get across, and you get a ride across. Well, that didn't work so well for me. I did that for about a half hour, nothing doing. I stood there kind of like I was behind glass waving, and the boaters would go back and forth. And by the way, over here in the corner, that's my lovely wife in our car and our camper, and she's got 2 cold beers and is drinking one. And I wanted the other one really bad. So with not much choice, she calls the marina, which is right over here, and they found a young guy to come over in his boat to pick me up for $10. And I was very happy for that to happen, because the next thing, we sidled up to the restaurant next to the marina and had cold beers and the best oysters I've ever had right out of the St. Mark's there, or the Bay Beyond, wherever. They were close by. The best oysters I've ever had. I think we actually had 24 of them, or 26 of them. It was a baker's dozen. The last few places I walked through, one was the Apalachicola National Forest, 500-something thousand acres. I think it's the 2nd largest national forest. More piney, beautiful piney country. And when it wasn't open pines with palmettos and sawgrass, it was thick, bushy, brushy, dark tie. But in and amongst there, very often were, you won't believe it, these are pitcher plants, like nothing I've ever seen. Are they not the most beautiful things? I had no idea that these were pitcher plants, or pitcher plants like these existed. But they are just absolutely the most glorious little things I've ever seen. And I love pitcher plants anyway. I name pitcher plants, but these were fantastic as well. Just beautiful. And it was getting time for all kinds of other things to come into bloom, including these this other carnivorous plant right here. Pitcher plants are carnivorous, and so are the honeydews right here. Sundews, excuse me, sundews. And of course, in the drier areas of the Apalachicola, there were rattlesnakes, and this bad boy wanted a piece of me. And of course, I got close enough, just close enough to get a picture, but not to do any further harm. Saw a few of those guys, and that was all I needed. The Bradwell Bay Wilderness is part of the Apalachicola. That was written up a few years ago in Backpacker magazine as one of the top 10 wilderness backpacks anywhere in the country. And it is everything of that. It is fantastic. It's a swamp. It's a bayhead swamp. filled with water and black gum trees and lots of brush and that kind of thing. And it was a challenge. Had to cross Monkey Creek up to my neck one afternoon to get in there, camp. And the next morning, out of the blue, this fella, a doctor from, I think he's from Chicago, Glenn, ended up showing up. He was hiking the whole Florida Trail. I was taking 72 days. He had to do it in a month. That's all the time he could get off from his practice. And so he met up with me. We hiked through Bradwell Bay Wilderness together, the worst of it, the worst stretch of it, 4 or 5 miles. And then he was gone in a flash. But this is what the Bradwell Bay looked like. All the things I love, snakes, maybe alligators, I don't know. Certainly snakes, and lots of dark water with things. But that's the route. Orange blazes. Oh, and there's one of my buddies. One of the few pictures I actually got of a cottonmouth. And they're not any fun. You don't want to get struck by a cottonmouth. But you slosh on and on and on, and you know things are looking at you. You know things are watching you. There's all kinds of stuff out there. What's swimming by your feet, your arms, your legs? You never know. Oh, hey, there's another one. But all good things must come to an end eventually. The waist-deep water of the Bradwell Bay gives way, and you emerge out the other side, and that was the end of that kind of, sort of. And you are one kind of muddy mess. For the Bradwell Bay Wilderness stretch, I traded out a pair of my boots for a pair of trail runners because I knew I would mess those up in the swamp as well. So that's what I looked like getting out of Bradwell Bay. All was well with the world because Fran met me at the other end at a campsite, the same one I'd stayed at when we first explored the trail before I hiked the AT back in 2015, which was pretty cool. Got a nice meal, continued on along the Panhandle, which has more road walking than I'd like. But as I explained earlier, you just get used to it, you put your head down and you go and you enjoy it as best you can. In the Pine Log State Forest, getting near the end of the trail, more beautiful piney woods. Got to really love the fragrant piney woods of Florida. You have to. And all of a sudden, I'm hiking along, and this is the middle of the day, a beautiful blue sunny day, and there's smoke, and then a lot of smoke, and then open flames, and the woods are erupting around me, and I have no idea what's going on. And I'm getting pretty concerned because the trail goes right through this, and pretty much soon it's all around. And I get out to this forest road, and I'm thinking, well, I'm just not sure which direction I should go. And then things get kind of critical because the fire's coming towards me, the smoke and everything. And out of the smoke comes this fella on an ATV. And he was one of the forestry crew guys. They had set a prescribed burn. Didn't bother to let any of the hikers know. Not that there's an easy way to do that anyway. But they do try to do it, but I never knew. And the trail was erupting all around me. And he says, well, that's the trail. He says, it's probably, there was a 40-foot wall of flame erupted as we were taking off. He says, why don't I just give you a ride a couple miles around out to the highway and you can continue from there. And so he brought me to a guy in a truck, brought me out to the highway, and I got around the fire. That was pretty interesting. At the far end, western end of the Panhandle, you do hike through Eglin Air Force Base, the far northern edge of it, which amazingly for an Air Force base, it's huge, but it's some of the wildest country there is. Not terribly photogenic, but just nice wooded wild country with these beautiful streams. You do end up at Gulf Islands, and this is the bridge over Santa Rosa Bay over to Navarre. And this is, this is what I was waiting for. Getting to those beautiful white quartz sand beaches, and the end indeed was in sight. We celebrated again because we were in kind of civilized terrain with a cold beer at a tiki bar. And then it was off for me to walk the last couple of days, 72 days and 1,100 miles. and, on a trip that had that was nothing like what I ever could have imagined. Yet it brought everything I ever wanted in a trip. So much beauty, so much camaraderie, solitude, great people along the way. And this is the last stretch, goes in and out of the Gulf Islands National Seashore as you're walking along the peninsula between Santa Rosa Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. Sometimes on the beach, which was pretty hard walking. And you could do some beach combing though, listen to the waves, listen to the gulls, walk through the dunes. And other times you were walking along the roads through the little villages, the little beach hamlets. My last night, I spent camped right here on Santa Rosa Bay, watched the lights across the bay on the mainland, and reflected pretty well on a really nice trip, beautiful long journey, and they're all good in the end. The final day took me along more sandy beach into Pensacola Beach, and then finally into the campground at Fort Pickens in the last part of the National Seashore. I was going to stop right here at the campsite. Fran had a campsite right on the Florida Trail. We went right through the campground. And I get there, we were going to have a beer and dinner, and I was going to finish the trail the next day. Well, I discovered all of a sudden that the end of the trail was less than a mile down the way. So we just continued on. And there is the northern terminus monument of the Florida Trail. And a little bit further down is that final sign right at historic Fort Pickens, which is an old Civil War fort. And that's the classic "You Are There" image, right at the very tip of Florida. And it was pretty cool to look, as it always is, to look back and see all of what you've spent your time and sweat and energy doing for the last few months, from one end of Florida almost to almost the other end of Florida. Pretty neat place, and a cool hike. Highly recommended. So that's my Florida Trail story, folks, and I'm sticking to it. Do we have, and thank you very much for being a nice audience. I wish I could be there and see you all. Bill, do we have, do we have time for some questions? Are there questions?
Yeah, we have a couple questions in the chat. Kathy has asked, this may have been mentioned, but is there any reason to hang your food bag?
Well, Billy, the boxcar hung his bag. Some people hung their bags where there were places to hang the bags. Very often there was not. Some people will carry bear cans. There are bears, and there's lots of little critters. I didn't bother. I do as I say, not as I do. I kept my food in my tent every night. I wasn't worried about it. That's been an MO of mine for years. You didn't hear me say that. But there was not a lot of reason I felt to hang. And hanging was really difficult, and I didn't want to carry a bear can. It's not required. And I never had any issues with, unlike on the PCT this year, I didn't have any issues with losing my food anymore. Oh, the rest of these are thanks. Did you see any rattlesnakes? Yes, I did. And did you hang your food? Yes, there are bears in Florida. So yeah, there's a little bit of everything. And the cool thing about Florida was, like I've said several times over, the diversity of the terrain. You know, Florida isn't at the top of your list to go hiking, but yet there are thousands of miles of trails. And in addition to that, there's great paddling in the interior, streams and lakes and ponds and all that. There's so much wildlife. There's so much wild country. Put it on your radar screen because there's a lot to do. There's a great state park system, which Fran got to see a lot of as she followed me more or less up the length of the trail.
My wild animals.
Yes, Fran was telling me she saw some wild buffalo in Florida. That was pretty cool too. So it's a really neat place. The hike itself, fantastic. There's a lot to do in Florida, and it's just not well known, and I'm really happy to bring it to you because it's a place more people should know about. Oh, Chris Bell. Hi, Chris. How are you? One of the trail angels down there, and Chris Bell is on. He says, can you talk a little about your experience at Billy Goat Day? Well, yeah. In January, the end of January, Florida Trail puts on a weekend, and it's called Billy Goat Days. And I don't know how many times Billy Goat has hiked every trail in America, but it was a great time to get together and see a bunch of people at the Florida Trail Association and meet other hikers. I met Sandra Friend, who writes the guidebook. Billy Goat was there, and lots of other cool people. So it was a neat gathering there. The folks at the Florida Trail are incredibly friendly, incredibly hardworking, and they're like any trail organization, like the AMC, like the MATC. People are really passionate about what they do and the resources that they're protecting, and they have a lot to be proud of. And every one of them, to a T, will do anything for you while you're down in Florida. There's also a couple other things. How did you keep your pack dry? I had a pack cover, which worked pretty well. I also used the poncho to keep me dry. Not a whole lot more than that. How much water did you carry every day is another question. That varied. If I was, when it was hot and there were long stretches, long-ish stretches, you know, you're drinking a lot of water when it's 90 or 100 degrees. So I'd carry 4 quarts oftentimes. I just never, ever, ever wanted to be short on water. I don't think I ever carried more than 4 quarts. Oftentimes you could get, if you were going to have a dry camp, you could get water and carry that to camp. I would often use the tactic of cooking in the afternoon wherever I found water, and then just carrying a couple quarts for that evening that I could drink, and I didn't need to carry extra water to cook as well. Did that a lot on the PCT as well. And by the way, folks, here in Maine, a lot of people from Florida are on this call, and I want to thank everybody from Florida. You guys are awesome. Let's see, one more. I did a swamp hike in the Everglades 4 years ago. Nice to see your photos and brings back good memories. Well, absolutely. Yeah, Florida's a great place. Lots to see.
Okay, we also had a question on, can we get a recording of the webinar? And the answer is yes. What we do is, so in a few days, we'll post this on YouTube, and there'll be a link on the Maine chapter's AMC Facebook page, or you can search for AMC Maine chapter, I think it's Appalachian Mountain Club Maine chapter in YouTube, and all of the webinars we've held are recorded and on YouTube. Any other questions? Good. Well, thanks, Carey. That was very interesting.
Yeah, and I just want to say a quick thanks to you, Bill, for taking the time to put this on, the folks at the AMC Maine chapter, and to all of you for being nice folks out there and tuning in. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. We've enjoyed it. We also, next Wednesday, we have another webinar. It's on trail maintenance, some basic trail maintenance stuff by one of AMC's, she's the supervisor, volunteer supervisor for the North Country up at Pinkham or Camp Dodge. So, all right, well, great. Thanks again, Carey, and thank you everyone for attending. And perhaps we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks. Thanks, Carey.
Thank you.
Yep, bye.